Well, good afternoon. I'm pleased to be speaking with you today about trauma-informed care and how it relates to libraries of all types. I'd like to thank Dr. Phyllis Thompson and Heidi Marsh for inviting me to present for Women on Wednesdays. The people working with the Women's Studies program are dear to me and have provided much care, support, and encouragement over the years. I've attended several WOW talks and found them informative and enjoyable. And they keep me updated on what my ETSU colleagues are researching. So I hope that you find this one informative as well. I'd like to apologize ahead of time for any interruptions we experience. Sometimes my internet goes down briefly, but the main problem I have with working from home is that my dogs and cats will sometimes appear and the dogs bark when a delivery truck passes by. So I'm hoping no deliveries in the neighborhood for a little bit. In July of last year, the American Library Association published a book I wrote, Trauma-Informed Approaches to Library Services. Originally, I wrote an article I planned to submit to a library journal for publication, but after literature search determined there was little published about trauma-informed care in libraries, I contacted an editor at ALA Editions and sent him the article and a book proposal, and then I wrote the book itself. So within it, I suggested that those working in and managing libraries educate themselves about trauma-informed care, which until recently was a feature of healthcare and social services, but not widely discussed or considered as an approach for libraries. I believe its framework can change our interactions with our communities and with ourselves for the good. Being trauma-informed begins with education and then can expand to involve a library's policies, procedures, and practices. I started learning more about trauma-informed care from students and faculty at ETSU several years ago. I helped many students gather literature on trauma-informed care and PTSD, but it wasn't until I attended a Women's Studies Steering Committee retreat at Highlander Research and Education Center in New Market, Tennessee, as well as additional workshops and conferences, that I truly understood the effect of childhood trauma, its legacy, and its costs. Then I became a foster parent in the state of Tennessee, and a large portion of that training covers adverse childhood events and how those generate trauma and how to parent children with those experiences. One of my trainers earned her BSW from ETSU and was earning her MSW at the time I attended the state's classes, and having her, a fellow ETSU alum, guide me through that process created a bond between us, which really strengthened my resolve to foster. And so I just throw that out as one example of how ETSU really affects our region, our faculty, our staff, and our graduates. So some of the information that I share with you today may be a review, especially if you've worked at ETSU for some time. Then it's likely you're well-versed in adverse childhood experiences, trauma-informed care, resilience, and a few more concepts that I'll touch on this afternoon. A majority of Americans experience traumatic events before the age of 18, and some call those adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. You can Google the ACEs test and learn your score, which is scaled from 1 to 10. People with higher scores have poorer outcomes than people who don't experience ACEs. ACEs compromises health, mental health, and educational attainment, and many of those with high ACEs scores lack the resilience to function and cope as well as they might. So the ACEs questions cover abuse, neglect, and dysfunctional family dynamics. And those experiences are far more common than we may think. According to the CDC, 61% of adults had at least one ACE, and 16% had 4 or more types of ACEs. Women and several racial, ethnic minority groups were at greater risk for experiencing 4 or more ACEs, and exposure to ACEs is associated with increased risk for health problems across the lifespan. So what informed my understanding of trauma-informed care, and those allied concepts was the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration documents. It's SAMSA is the acronym. So SAMSA's definitions are used as the standard in trauma-informed care. Their concept of trauma states that individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So events can occur once or repeatedly. An individual's experience of these helps determine whether it was traumatic. An event may be experienced as traumatic for one person and may not be experienced that way by another. For example, a Marine deployed to a war zone may experience trauma and another Marine may not. The long-lasting adverse effects of the event are a critical component of trauma. They can be immediate or delayed. Duration may be short-term or long-term. Traumatic effects include hypervigilance, numbing, and avoidance. And those responses eventually wear people down physically, mentally, and emotionally. So another set of ideas to be familiar with are the 4 R's. These are key assumptions in a trauma-informed approach. So a trauma-informed library, for example, realizes that the widespread impact of trauma and understands potential paths for recovery, recognizes the signs and symptoms in clients, families, staff, and others involved in the system, and responds by fully integrating that knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, practices, and seeks to actively resist re-traumatization. One of the major ways to resist re-traumatization is for the caregiver or educator or librarian to practice self-care so that we don't burn out or become numb or uncaring. When I met with students for research appointments, we spend 30 or more minutes together on one or more occasions, and we talk about their topics and what resources they need to complete their assignment. Many of the students with whom I've worked write about topics that are very dear and personal to them and their families. One social work major spoke to me about their siblings' history of self-harm and how that focused her interests on helping the incarcerated with self-harm. Oftentimes when students meet with us, they feel as though librarians are their last resort. They've worked themselves into an anxious state about an assignment that they cannot figure out. Sometimes they're reluctant to email the faculty and talk to them, their instructor, or they're so overwhelmed that they don't know where to begin and they need reassurance and hand-holding and someone to break down the steps for them. So most of the time, I don't think librarians are going to be re-traumatized, but I did want people to know that all of our interactions are not just quick, where's this book, where's this item. Some of them are more in depth, and there is a potential to deal with people who have at least some anxiety about their schoolwork. So there are 6 principles to trauma-informed care, and you can see safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. So safety includes physical, psychological, social, and moral safety. Not everyone feels safe in libraries, but libraries can change their built environment, their signage, and their service philosophies to increase feelings of safety. Libraries should rethink their security practices around hiring armed guards or having law enforcement officers regularly patrol buildings, given the negative experiences Black people and people of color have with police. One of the stories Monique W. Morris shared in Push Out, the Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools, was about a young Black woman who had had very negative experiences with older white women for most of her life. Therefore, older white women triggered her. So if you didn't know, 85% of librarians and library workers are women, and as a profession, librarianship is rapidly graying. So our profession, the people in our profession, may inadvertently trigger our patrons. So I believe that knowledge can help us old white women approach all students with a warm, welcoming tone to make them feel safe in the library. Even though Pew Research data establishes librarians as among the most trusted professionals in the United States, not everyone trusts the library or librarians. Andreas Varheim said that public libraries are producers of trust and social capital because they offer free universal information and space to everyone. His 2014 study indicated that library programming increased social trust within a targeted population of Mexican immigrants. He stated that this population distrusts government institutions, but was convinced to participate in public library programming based upon advocacy and word of mouth from their friends who demonstrated that public libraries could be trusted. So historically, libraries have limited or prohibited access to materials and to the building to people who weren't white. Overcoming mistrust of institutions is difficult for people whose experiences with them is negative, especially when a multitude of rules and policies and procedures exist. Peer support in libraries can take many forms, from having student workers in academic libraries, staff, service desks, to teen volunteers at the public library facilitating young adult programs. It also includes the organization, the library itself, by having library workers support each other's workflow and professional experience in the workplace. Liz Murray, who I'll provide more context for closer to the end of our time together today, said that a long-term effect of childhood traumatization is feeling like you don't belong. There's an otherness that they experience that builds a wall between them and everyone else. They don't participate or won't participate and may be unable to self-advocate, and that's where peer support is helpful for those who've suffered childhood traumatization. Collaboration and mutuality. So sharing power between library workers and library patrons, as well as between library workers and library administration, is what collaboration and mutuality encompasses. Shared decision-making works better in library organizations that are flat. The more levels to an organization, the more concentrated the power can be at the upper levels. One library-based example of mutuality is the reference interview. That's library terminology for when someone asks a librarian or library worker a question. So in theory, the reference interview is about mutuality in that both people bring data and experience into the mix. They share information with each other to arrive at a solution to the problem or the answer to a question. In recent decades, libraries have grown interested in the user's experience of the library. Many of us may recall the time when librarians were gatekeepers who protected books and resources and controlled who gained access to them. We still do that too a little bit, but we're much more about open access now. The profession service philosophy has matured, and for the most part, many libraries are on the right path to empowerment, voice, and choice. We ask students to demonstrate how they use the library's website, what terms they prefer, and then we adapt ourselves to be more user-friendly given their input. Having students and other community members serve in an advisory capacity empowers them and allows their voice into spending decisions. For example, at Sherrod Library, the dean meets with the student advisory committee to seek their counsel in spending monies accumulated from the yearly student library fee. Another example of choice this time includes giving our community say in communication methods. Older generations sometimes prefer USPS mail. Younger ones prefer phone calls or email notifications and text notifications. Examining cultural, historical, and gender issues allows libraries to move past stereotypes and remove biases from our services, collections, outreach, and spaces. For example, instead of celebrating Black History Month once a year in February, a trauma-informed library has Black history materials, exhibits, and displays visible and available year-round. Likewise, instead of celebrating Pride in June, including LGBTQ-friendly signage, signals that the library welcomes everyone and is a safe place. I'm probably not the only person who found sanctuary from bullies in a library. There's a long history of people finding sanctuary in the library in spite of negative stereotypes of evil or harsh librarians. Dr. James Carmichael and other library researchers emphasize that the library is an important space for teens who are coming out to find information because of the potential anonymity the library provides. Nicola Andrews suggests that library workers practice cultural humility. Those three concepts include examining and understanding your own background, committing to dismantling and redressing power structures, and building relationships with people who are different from you. One of the things that I write about in my book is how within the culture of libraries, our use of language, of negative language, creates a problematic mindset that influences how we communicate and treat members of our community. Within librarianship, difficult people are known as problem patrons. So how we negatively characterize them from the start informs and influences our tone, approach, and our overall interaction. Difficult people display behaviors that are essentially trauma coping mechanisms. And what do I mean by difficult? Someone who may be angry or belligerent or demanding or unreasonable. Some people's first response to people needing our help is wondering what's wrong with them. Why can't they be normal or act normal? Why are they so angry or loud or difficult to communicate with? And once you've received a bit of background about trauma and how it manifests, then you can ask a different question: what happened to you? For example, libraries of all types provide sanctuary and respite for their communities. Public libraries are places where people without homes spend a large amount of time. They sleep, they bathe, they use the restroom, they charge their phones, and they use computers and Wi-Fi. The public library provides a climate-controlled space where they can escape the elements as well as other things. Academic libraries, too, provide spaces where students and community members may find respite. They sleep and eat and use the building as their home. My junior high school library was the only place I could go when I was bullied at lunchtime. It was quiet and empty, and I was glad to escape the girls who threatened to beat me up. You could say this was the beginning of a beautiful relationship between me and libraries, but it actually started at least a decade earlier when my mom brought me to the public library when I first learned to read. I was comfortable in libraries from a young age and felt safe within them. The most essential thing for those working in libraries to do is to become trauma-informed is attend a workshop like this where you receive an introduction to the principles. Once library workers are educated and feel genuine empathy toward trauma survivors, then libraries can make changes to their spaces, policies, procedures, and practices that are trauma responsive. I believed or felt like I was fairly professionally empathetic toward everyone whom I helped in the library, but learning all that I could about trauma and its effects on people's behavior altered my worldview and increased my compassion and levels of care and understanding that I generate with when I'm working with people. I'm much more patient and understanding than I once was, because I can admit, yes, I've often thought, what is wrong with that person? Why can't they act right? And that was, I guess my best thinking at the time before I was educated about it. So having one person in the library be trauma informed and or trauma responsive can make a difference in someone's life. I do believe that one person can make a difference. One person made a difference in Liz Murray's life. He wasn't a librarian, but he was a neighbor who cared for her. The key to childhood resilience is having one adult who believes in you and supports you. I heard Liz Murray speak in 2019 at Addressing ACEs, a Call to Action, a summit that gathered in Bluntville, Tennessee. Murray's inspirational story, Homeless to Harvard, was subject of an Emmy-nominated Lifetime movie. At 15, she was homeless in the Bronx and eventually finished up 4 years of high school in 2 and was admitted to Harvard. She credits her resilience and success to her neighbor, Arthur, who tutored Liz, helped her complete homework, brought her on numerous day trips, and encouraged her to imagine a life beyond her circumstances. Above all, Arthur helped Liz understand that she matters. He was the person who urged her forward when she was 15 and homeless. Librarians can be that person for those in need of a supportive adult who believes in them. School librarians, public librarians, university librarians interact with children, teens, and adults and may develop lifelong relationships with each other. I have a whole lot more information that I could share with you, but it's very detailed and, has to do with, how you can make your space, your physical library space, more inviting, those types of things that I wasn't sure those would really interest. I'm expecting this as a general audience. So at this point, I would love to answer any questions or hear your comments.
Rebecca.
Heidi has unmuted us. So Jamie?
Yes, I just want to say that you don't know how much comfort it's given me to listen to you today. It almost makes me emotional because what I teach, especially things like youth violence and things with, drug use disorders, you send students off to complete assignments and you do everything you can to make them more comfortable or to feel less threatened in the process, particularly knowing that so many of them have backgrounds that really are triggers for the very things that we're studying. And just to know that someone like you is there when they begin that research, because you don't know what's going on with them when you send them off to do an assignment. You have them in class, but then you send them off and you don't know how they're handling things. And mine is more of a comment of just thank you for understanding so clearly how this benefits students as they go in to do their individual research projects, and knowing that some of them will have real issues with the topics we cover and they're not always with us.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's I wish that we had more training in counseling, how to help students, but we have excellent resources at ETSU, and we do what we can to calm people and make sure that they feel confident in completing their assignments. But then we also we refer people to other units on campus all the time, so the counseling center, or different departments if it's an issue with financial aid. Thank you, Jamie. I'm glad that you are reassured now to know that when they come to the library, they have the kind of attention paid to them that can help them out.
Thank you.
Rebecca, there's a question, a really great question in the chat. Do you have examples of trauma-sensitive signage, rewording for websites, etc.? I try to write emphasizing what you can do, writing in the second person rather than the formal, the library requires language. And so the person may want to comment on the question, but I wanted to raise a.
No, that's a great question. I think that writing in the U is really important, and there's because it when we talk in abstractions like the library requests that you do not do, that really puts up walls between people and reminds people that libraries are institutions and are institutionalized. So sometimes we feel very cold and forbidding, and there is such a thing as library anxiety, that students who come in the library, adults who come in the library, are anxious about coming in the library because of either previous bad experiences in the library, or for students who come to shared library, a lot of times they've not been in a 4-story tall library, so the building itself can be imposing. But the signage aspect is really important as far as using more common language that everyone understands, and using, I guess, less punitive language. So often, I think if you Google library signage, I've seen a Tumblr where people have collected really awful examples of library signage. And it's like, do not do this, it's all very harsh and unwelcoming, and, using all caps. So it sounds like your practice of using second person is a really good way to make people feel more welcome.
Hi, Rebecca. I am a public librarian in Georgia, and I just wanted any advice you had about navigating the cognitive dissonance between needing to enforce certain library behavior policies and having that trauma-informed care that people really desperately need.
Right. No, that is a difficult place to be in, because those are times when your personal, I don't know, when you definitely are at odds with what the rules are. So for me, if I'm having to enforce a rule that I may not agree with, or that to try to diffuse a situation, I try to be as calm and understanding as possible, and really talk to the person and get them to calm down, to explain, what the problem is and how we can help. I'm sorry, I don't think that's the best answer, but it is a difficult situation to be in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Lisa Kay wrote in the chat that she would love to hear ways about how a public space can be designed to be inviting with a trauma-informed perspective. I think to build on your idea about the way you were talking about sanctuary, maybe.
Right. So a lot of what I have discovered about people who have experienced trauma, they're hypervigilant, they are anxious, having spaces that are calm, that feel safe to them is important. And some of the, it's really hard, I think, to make a space completely trauma responsive, because we never know what may trigger someone. So, when I was talking about Push Out, that book, that old white woman triggered this young Black woman, I was just, okay, so how do we do that? How do we control? We can't control for everything, so we have to try and neutralize some of that if we can. So with the spaces, it has to do with making people feel comfortable. So if someone has PTSD, or is anxious, hypervigilant about their space and about who is around them, we can organize spaces in the seating areas so that chairs are not so that someone can't come up behind that person and sort of frighten them. So chairs should be against walls if that's possible. Another thing too is to provide lots of individual seating for people, because people who have been traumatized, depending on how they were traumatized, may not want to be sitting next to someone, like in a medical office building. Sometimes you have like a couch that you might have to share with a stranger. Sometimes library furniture is like that as well. So as much individual seating as possible. I know in our library, we have a variety of different kinds of seating. We have individual chairs, we have hard chairs, we have soft chairs, we have all kinds of chairs that will appeal to different people, and will provide them with different feelings of safety. Some of the other things that I've read is that cleanliness is really important. Sometimes children who are neglected grow up in spaces that aren't so clean. So, if they see, as an older teenager or an adult, they see a place that is really dirty or lots of litter, sometimes that can send them back to a bad childhood memory.
Rebecca, hi. Thank you so much for doing this today. This is fantastic. I'm Julia. I work here in Johnson City at the Public Library. And I had a question about, you made a comment earlier about police presence in public libraries. And this is something that professionally I think I've struggled with for years now. And certainly here in Johnson City, when we're open, we do have a police presence, if not the whole day, many hours of the day. And it's sort of twofold. It's for the safety of a segment of our patrons, and then also the feeling of safety for the staff. But I'm aware of the fact that it does make certain users uncomfortable, who should feel welcomed in the building. So I wondered if you had any examples of best practices for how to balance that, because very often I feel as though I'm struggling to meet the needs of just very different populations, and they're pulling us in different directions all the time. And it feels as though there's not a good way to make one segment of our population feel very comfortable and welcomed, and then not make the other segment of the population feel uncomfortable and unwelcomed. So I would love any suggestions or best practices you might have for how to balance that.
Thank you, Julia. And I use the public library a lot. And so I have seen the presence there, and I can understand. I worked in public libraries for a long time, and there were times I felt unsafe as a library worker from some of the patrons who were a little too interested in my shelving of books. But no, I mean, that is an excellent question. I don't have any best practices to recommend. I think most things come down to a balance. So that's one of the conundrums that libraries are constantly dealing with, is that we have to be all things to all people. And so how do you prioritize the needs of different people? If you get, if you're told by the city commission, oh, this is how it's going to be, you don't really have much say in how things are. I think that our law enforcement officers are getting a little more training in some. I think that I have read that some law enforcement agents are being trained in trauma-informed care and trauma-informed responsiveness. So there is hope that I don't really have a good answer for that, actually. I'm sorry, Julia, because I know it is a tough spot to be in. I think we can just hope that things will improve, because there is a weird, I don't know, it's not a balance because you do need to make everyone feel safe. So how do you make everyone feel safe completely?
I think that's that was excellent question. I thought you did a great job answering it, Rebecca. I just wanted to add quickly that some of our ETSU public safety officers have had Fetty training, which is the law enforcement version of how to do trauma-informed interviews with victims of violence. And not all of it's a quite expensive training, so that's something for us to continue to promote and for our law enforcement at ETSU. But also notice that Callie has a question.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Callie.
So you talked a lot about the physical spaces, and I was wondering, since so much of what we do right now is online, do you have any ideas for how we can use trauma-informed care principles when we are interacting with students or patrons in the virtual setting instead of face-to-face?
No, that's great because, right, I do focus a lot on the physical because that's been, you know, my professional experiences in the physical library. But this last year, you know, has not been physical, it's been virtual. Are you talking about like a one-on-one, or are you talking about in an instructional setting when you would be working with a class?
Really any ideas that you have, because we do have both. We have that one-on-one interaction on occasion, and then a lot of what we do is just how do we get this information out to a larger group or convey information to them in a way that they don't panic or misinterpret something that is said because we don't have the benefit of seeing their face go, oh no.
Yeah. What I try to do is just be as break it down as simply as possible, because even if I'm giving instructions or sharing information, I have a tendency to resort to, you know, library terminology or some kind of discipline language. So I think just making everything as clear and concise as possible when you're talking or writing is really helpful. I always emphasize, well, not in this session, but usually I'm like, please interrupt me if there's something you don't understand, so that when it comes to you, you know, it's like, what is she talking about? We can talk about it in the moment. I know that doesn't always work, and a lot of people don't. A lot of instructors don't like that. Don't want to be interrupted, but that's not a problem for me. I think all that we can do to improve ourselves, improve our professional skills is important. So a couple weeks ago, there was a really interesting Zoom meeting that happened, sponsored by ETSU, where everyone talked about dealing with students in an online environment in a Zoom room, and why some students may have their cameras off or their mics off, and how we don't know the circumstances. And I know for my child who is in 6th grade, when she's been in remote school, they insist that she has the Zoom on, that her mic is on constantly. And I think that's just really exhausting for everyone. And so, you know, keep talking to people who are doing this thing and going through the same things that we are, and figuring out what is working best, how to make people feel most comfortable in this situation, which is, you know, for some maybe you know, having their camera on all the time. And for others, it may be not having their camera on at all.
I can add to that. I just pasted into the chat the cameras on versus cameras off opinion piece that the Strong Brain Institute produced and was published in the Johnson City Press, which kind of we had a town hall. The Strong Brain Institute had a town hall, I don't remember when, December. And it was basically an hour-long discussion for folks who were interested in what to do about that. Do you mandate it? Do you give people grace to have their cameras off? And there's not any right answer, but one of the things you should be is compassionate and sensitive and thoughtful and empathic, and consider that there could be other kinds of reasons, but why people want their cameras on or cameras off. So check out the article that I just posted the link to, and we also have a recording of the town hall. I don't know immediately where that is, but I can share it with Phyllis, or maybe Phyllis can find it. But we had that one, and so that was a virtual resilience topic. And we also had which I guess is a electronic resilience topic, which is on emailing, like how to be nice in emails, rules about email correspondence, which are, we use the term resilience informed. And we also have that recording of a 1-hour town hall for that session as well.
Thank you, Wally. I think I missed the email one, so I'll go back and watch that one. But the cameras on, cameras off was really informative, and I'm really pleased that you all are doing that and you know, sharing such important content with everyone. I'm trying to look at the chat to see if there are any other questions, but it's not coming up for me for some reason.
I am scrolling through right now.
Rebecca, I'd just like to say
Thanks.
This is Donna, and I just so appreciated your comment about students coming to you kind of as a last resort, and all of the stress that they bring to you again and again and again, and the toll that it takes on you, like your own need for self-care and trying to figure out how to manage their anxiety so it doesn't trigger your own anxiety. So thank you for that.
Sure. No, and it's usually I guess my bucket has been full for a long time, so it's not been a struggle to deal with other people's anxiety, but this year has been difficult for all of us, and I think we all need lots of self-care. But yeah, I'm just I think we hear more good things about students' interactions in the library with staff and faculty and our student workers and graduate assistants than we do negative. And so that's always a good thing.
Rebecca, hey, this is David Atkinson Libraries. I wanted to say thank you so much for the work you do for Share It in this research and being able to share it with such a terrific audience. And Phyllis, thank you so much for putting this together. I'm looking forward to learning more about Rebecca's research and how we can have more of these conversations in Share It, because it's really important for us to have communication about what we do and how we do it, so we can learn from one another and make better informed choices. So Rebecca, thank you so much.
Sure. I'm happy to, I mean, this is something that I've really felt strongly about and was, have been personally affected by. So it means a great deal to me. And I was just looking in the chat, and, one of the things that came to my mind as well was to use police, to have plainclothes enforcement as opposed to the uniforms, because the uniforms with the tasers and the guns, those can be really a little much whenever I see officers anymore. I'm just, kind of taken aback.
I am Ev Shepherd. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Is this a suggestion for Julia? She was saying that she has some concerns about having police in her library, considering her population. And the unfortunate fact of working in a public library is that we sometimes have people that come in that have some serious issues going on in their lives, and the only way to safely ensure their safety as well as everybody else's is to ask for the police to come in. And I'm going to give you an example. So we have community police in our area, and we have some very well-known patrons throughout our community that are mentally ill, and they sometimes forget to act appropriately in public for really good reasons. And it's at that point that we have asked our officers who are trained in those situations to come in and to escort her to a facility for assistance. So it also depends on your framework of your local government. You do want to talk to your local police officers. If you have community policing, ask the officers to come in and actually actively engage in the community. They usually already do. Our officers go to the different schools. We are a predominantly African-American community, and we are also, our police force is also predominantly African-American. So they get to see themselves reflected in the entirety of the community. And I think that's also very important. So do talk to your local police chapter. We actually talk regularly from the library standpoint with our local law enforcement, and we partner with several events with them so that our patrons are comfortable seeing, Officer X at the grocery store and at the library and at their school, and just walking their dog because they live in the neighborhood too. So just like all the people that are in our library, they're all our neighbors. And it would behoove us all to grow those relationships between neighbors, if that makes sense. I might have gone on too much, forgive me. So that's it.
No, I think that makes sense, to treat everyone as your neighbor, and to get to know them.
I think one of the things that we learn as we're using trauma-informed approaches to build resilient communities is that building trust is an important aspect of that relational process. And but also that as we build trust, we need to think about the intersections of difference and how relationships and how relationships are different across different cultural lines, and be sensitive to those cultural differences, I guess is what I want to say in response to that we spend time listening and opening ourselves up for difference, as opposed to just assuming that everybody thinks and sees the world out of the same lens that we do.
Right. Angel said to have some scripts handy that you can use to de-escalate situations when they arise. And as far as having scripts, what's also really helpful is that if you have some practice in nonviolent communication, that would be a real great professional development skill for really anyone who works with the public, so that you have some time to practice those things. When I was in library school, I had never worked at a reference desk before. And one of my classes, we practiced asking each other questions, pretending, role playing. So I think that, practicing those kinds of situations can help you become more comfortable in that role if that's not a role you're comfortable with. And your body and your mind can learn how to deal more empathetically with conflict.
Heidi Marsh makes a great point in the chat. She says, I'm wondering if there are also relationships that can be built with emergency mental health response teams or mobile units that perhaps don't involve police or do so only when necessary. And Julia brings up Ryan Dowd's work, and Angel brings up Warren Graham's work. I know that the College of Arts and Sciences at ETSU has built a emergency response team sort of playbook for what happens when there is an emergency on campus. What's the protocol? What's the procedure that we can follow, and how do we use those procedures in a way that build capacity and resilience and that are sensitive and trauma informed? I want to take a moment. I see it's 12:58, so I want to just take a moment to, Heidi asked me if I would remind everyone, if you have not messaged Heidi Marsh and you are a member of the Graduate Student Professional Association, or you're a part of our Psych Speaker series and would like your presence documented today, then please go ahead and message her. If you've already messaged her, you're good to go. So you're done. So, but before we close, are there any burning questions? Or Rebecca, would you like to close us with the last word?
Well, I think you all have asked some really excellent questions that I didn't have good answers for. So I'm going to go back to the drawing board and see what kind of answers I can find. So I really appreciate everyone and your questions and your comments. They're really great, and I look forward to talking with y'all more as you develop your trauma-informed libraries or other spaces.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for presenting, for sharing the work that you've done in the book that you've written, and also your experience as well as your expertise. We really appreciate you being here and talking with us today. Someone just asked if the slides and the recording would be available, and yes, it will. Give us about a week, and you can find Rebecca on the Women's Studies website. And so the talk will be up there available for you. So definitely check it out. So, well, thank you so much for coming. Next month, we have a behind the scenes tour of the costume shop of the Mary B. Martin Theater, which is going to be a great look behind the scenes. Beth Skinner, who is the director of costumes at ETSU Theater, is going to have her camera and take us backstage. So I hope you'll be here first Wednesday in March. We'll look forward to seeing you again. And a warm round of applause. Let's show our love for Rebecca Tolley.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all for being here.